I'll get started here with a quick welcome and hello from the Highlights Foundation. I'm sending you all wishes for safety and peace tonight and always. I'm Allison Green Myers. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the program director here at the Highlights Foundation, and I'm excited for a summer gather with the friends we have gathered here. With me tonight from the Highlights Foundation is our executive director, George Brown. Hi, George. And I see several Highlights Foundation team members in the participation panel as well. A couple notes for you as our gathered guest. As a webinar, we cannot see your video or hear your audio during the session. We can see the Q&A feature. The chat right now is only turned on for our hosts and panelists, but in just a moment, I'll be opening that up for everyone. We'll also be recording tonight's session, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of the recording and a copy of all of the great links we put in the chat tonight. If we mention book titles, I'll put those into the chat as well, and we'll share them in that recording too. We would really love for you to add questions that you have to the Q&A feature. It's so easy for us to find the questions then. And when we get to the end of the special conversation, we'll open up to the questions that you have. You may have heard me say this before, but it's very worth saying again in these spaces, in the Q&A feature, on a Zoom webinar, or if we're together at the Highlights Foundation in person, we ask for your respectful engagement. We ask that you join us tonight with no hate, no harm, and no harassment of any kind. I'll place a link once we get started to our community standards in the chat for those of you who are just getting to know us, or for those of you who would like to read our full commitment. And we bring this commitment to all of our programs and partnerships for a safe and inclusive environment. I'll say that tonight's gather, we haven't had a gather for a few weeks, and I love them. I love bringing these great conversations together with amazing authors. And I would say tonight's conversation is a small part of a much larger initiative, which feels perfectly fitting when we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about the title that we have tonight is Amplifying Black Voices for Social Justice, Racial Equity, and Caring for Our Planet. And when we think about it, we all play this part, right, in amplifying Black voices for social justice and for caring for this planet that we love and we're a part of. If you don't know this already, if you didn't see it in some of the announcements, this gather and many other pieces are connected to a partnership with Knology to amplify Black storytellers in STEM, Black Rep for Kids. It's a collaboration with the National Science Foundation. It's a funded project that is led by Knology in collaboration with us here at the Highlights Foundation for programs just like this, the National Black Child Development Institute, and the Association of Children's Museums. This special project brings together Black researchers and practitioners from a variety of fields. I love this. It's climate scientists, developmental psychologists, informal learning, and children's media, which is us here, storytellers, to collaboratively develop methods and strategies for creating children's climate media that helps Black families and their children discuss, prepare for, and respond to a multitude of environmental threats. Wow, big. We're very grateful to be a very small part of this great big initiative. And I offer my gratitude tonight to our authors that we have gathered here, Pam Courtney and Crystal Allen and Andrea Loney. They'll be sharing with us personal experiences. They'll be sharing with us stories from talking to kids and stories that they're writing for kids. They'll give us some craft techniques. I love that the three storytellers we have here work so hard to center kids in all that they do. They're great teachers. They're great presenters, and they're great storytellers. So we'll learn an awful lot. One of the things that we talked about just briefly was thinking about climate change and thinking about the idea of offering both the honesty, the hope, and the hope for kids. I think our kids are a part of these structures that we've put in place, which often may make them feel powerless at times. But here we are trying to craft power for them because they'll be the ones that are leading our planet and making meaningful change. And so we're really excited for the conversation tonight. At the end, I'll come back on with some questions that our audience might have. We do want to say there is some audio that you'll hear tonight, and you in your home on whatever kind of device you are on have the power to turn the audio up or turn the audio down when it plays. I know we sometimes get messages about the audio being able to hear it, but just know that we have it on the loudest feature, and you'll be able to control that when you hear it. So to begin, I'll welcome our guide tonight, which is Pamela Courtney. So thank you for being with us, Pam, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. And thank you, Highlights, for creating this opportunity to be part of such an immensely important conversation. And good evening to all of you. We're so glad that you took time out to come and hang out with us and be a part of this topic. And while I'm thanking everybody, I want to thank my dear panelists, my friends, Crystal Allen, Andrea Loney. Thank you, ladies. I am so grateful to be a part of this with them. I get a chance to hang out with them. I get a chance to discuss this important topic. And, let's just jump in it. So, as you all know, we're here to discuss climate change. We are here to especially discuss how do we bring this subject to children, writing about climate change, inspiring meaningful change for our future. But tonight's conversation will focus on marginalized voices, voices from poorer communities, specifically amplifying Black voices, amplifying all of our voices, and doing that through storytelling. So where our stories highlight, we want to ensure that our stories highlight the social justices, the social inequities, the environmental injustices, but not just bring light to it, but how can we also bring hope to these narratives as we write them and as we share them with our early learners and our young learners, our read aloud audiences. So we're here because basically we understand that stories do matter, right? Not only stories, but our stories really do matter. How do we center the Black child in our stories? How do we make them not just about the tough topics or the victims, but how do we inspire hope to the people who are reading that? So before we begin anything, I want to allow Crystal and Andrea, would you start us off by just, sharing with the audience a little bit about your books, how you feel they might fit into this conversation, and just sharing our why regarding this topic, why we wanted to be a part of this, why we wanted to participate in this conversation.
Sure.
Crystal, yeah.
Thank you, Pam, for moderating for us tonight on this very important subject. My name is Crystal Allen. I write upper and lower middle grade contemporary fiction. I wanted to participate in this conversation for two reasons. One, I live in Texas, a state constantly struggling with climate change issues that affect a large marginalized population in our state that I'm sure needs more education about climate change. And the second reason is I believe solutions happen when a community becomes engaged and educated about a problem. And I want to be a part of that solution, Pam.
Right on. I love it. And I do mean both the WRITE and RIGHT. Well said. So, Andrea, you want to share with us?
Yes, I'm Andrea Loney. I write from like board books to chapter books and nonfiction and fictional picture books. I have a middle grade biography of Stacey Abrams. And this is a very important topic to me. If for no other reason, I remember being a little kid in the 80s and they were talking about how we were destroying the ozone layer. And I was like, man, by the time I grow up, there'll be no ozone layer and this will just be awful. And then at some point, they pulled back the chemicals, I guess they were using, like fluorocarbons and everything, and it healed.
Mm.
And like how excited I was as a kid to know that like things could be going wrong in a certain way, but you know, people can make choices and can make changes and you know can make things happen. So I think that that's really good. I'm also a college professor at Los Angeles Trade Technical College. Most of my students are Black, Latino, and Asian, and I teach them technology because I want to make sure that there's enough people of color where the decisions are being made. And that's also part of the reason why I write the kind of books I write about, whether it's about Black joy, whether it's about kindness in animals, whether it's about my, I was telling Pam this, my utopia stories as opposed to dystopia stories about little kids in the future, including Afro-Latina children in the future, getting along and making things work. I do believe in a world that works for the majority of us. And I think by writing about it, it helps us all get there just a little bit faster.
Love it. I love that. And the fact that the way that you center children and Black children in your series, I absolutely love it. And everybody, you want to check that out. All right. So speaking of children, why don't we hear what the children have to say? Allison mentioned earlier that we have some audio. So we're going to be shooting some questions out at the kids, and they're going to share what their thoughts are about climate change. All right. Andrea, are you ready with that?
Here we go. You may need to turn your audio up.
Have you heard of the term climate change?
Yes.
No?
Yeah. Yes, I have.
What is climate change?
Yeah, I wonder when it started and like when did it become like a concern and how scientists like figured out what the cause of it was.
Climate change is a change in normal weather in an area for an extended amount of time.
Where did you learn about climate change?
A few seconds ago, you told me.
School books, like the internet, teachers.
Science class, and when I come home, the news will have like news stories about climate change.
What do you think causes climate change?
I have no idea.
Putting their plastic with their trash instead of separating it.
The forest collects carbon dioxide. When that tree is cut down, all the carbon dioxide that's been inside that tree will be released, and that will cause other trees to die.
Yeah, like a landfill, burning all of the gases that we have from like our cars, factories.
How dangerous do you think climate change is?
Summers are getting hotter. It's getting a lot more humid too. The air, it just doesn't smell as natural as it used to when I was little.
It's kind of a concern for the air quality because like I have asthma, and so like if I breathe air that has all these chemicals in it, like there might be breathing problems and like chest pains and stuff like that.
What do you think grown-ups could do to slow down climate change?
I have no idea.
Research.
They could enforce laws like recycling laws.
Start committees.
Adults can probably reduce their carbon footprint, reduce greenhouse gases, or change to a different energy source.
Ask the president to do some funding.
Reduce and like reuse, recycle.
Ask them if they could start moving towards like climate safe options, like not using plastic as much. Like they could buy solar panels for their own home.
Do you think children and teens should be included in the conversations about climate change?
Yes, and my reason is so that as they get older, they'll know what's happening outside and why. Plus, they might be able to think of a solution or something.
I think they wouldn't really care.
Because how the world is now.
We will inherit the planet after everybody else is gone. So, and like the decisions that we make now will probably affect us later.
Yeah, we could recycle, we could plant trees, we could do community service and pick up trash. That's what I do.
I think that they should, because there is a lot of smart kids out there with bright ideas that they could do. Like you said, like Vivian said, like going out and posting around the school, posting around like your neighborhood or your town, and just spreading awareness. You know, passing out flyers, and I don't know, like posting it up everywhere so people know, and that people can actually know what's happening to our Earth.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. This was pretty eye-opening, right, Andrea? Share your thoughts about when you were listening to these audio recordings. What were you thinking about how much the kids knew or didn't know?
You know, it's interesting to me about how some kids know, they've got they rattle off a list, and other kids they're just trying to be kids. They're trying to go outside and play. Here's this grown-up asking them these questions. But, you know, they're noticing that it's getting warmer too. And one of the kids who didn't really have a lot of things to add to this also added that he had just gotten over COVID and how he was concerned about how climate change is affecting, you know, people's health and all of that. So, but really, especially the last part, it made me so excited for the future to see just the plans that these kids have.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful to work on.
It's pretty inspiring too, right? But just the fact that some of them had their own special stories that they shared. One talked about the asthma, and as you said, I think we weren't able to put the clip in about the child with the COVID, but one child was like, you know, the air doesn't smell like it used to when I was a little kid. And I love hearing those personal stories. As a matter of fact, you know, I thought it would be a good idea if each of us could share like a personal story as it relates to how climate change or environmental injustices or those social inequities, how those social inequities due to climate change, how that has affected our personal stories. Crystal?
Well, I live very close to Houston, actually about 25 miles from Galveston. And we have had hurricanes before, but they've always come through Galveston, and there's a lot of buildings in between the city where I live and Galveston, which has always slowed hurricanes down. Well, just last month, Hurricane Beryl came through, and she didn't come through Galveston. And I don't think anybody was expecting it. And the city that I live in, we took a direct hit. And it was something I'd never experienced before, and a fear hit me that I couldn't control. And the uncertainty of what was going on was debilitating. And I watched the city I live in almost turn dystopian. I mean, grocery stores weren't open, restaurants weren't open, none of the street lights were working. People were hollering and screaming at each other. There were crashes in the streets, and it was just the most awful thing that I'd ever seen. And I started thinking, Pam, about what was going on and how it's always discussed the effects of it, but nobody really talks about the causes, because it's not just when the hurricanes happen, Pam. I've also been involved in disastrous times when we were told a hurricane was coming, and everybody was doing their best to get out of town. And we were trying to get to San Antonio, which we thought would be out of the path of the hurricane. And it usually takes about 2.5 hours to get to San Antonio. It took us 12 hours to get there. And people were on the sides of the road with no water. The police were blocking off the exits to the towns in between where I live in San Antonio. And we couldn't go to the restroom. We couldn't get gas. We couldn't do anything. It was just catastrophic.
Wow.
And then there was no hurricane. So
you know what? It makes me think about the impact, that lasting impact that you know how it's affecting you, but are the most vulnerable of our vulnerable population. That lasting impact, it stays with them.
Yes.
It stays with them. I wonder, how do we create stories as writers? How do we create stories that tie in to the emotional state? Because after you deal with that, the kids still have to go to school, they still have to interact with their friends. So how do we tie in the emotional state of the kids' day-to-day lives after having gone through such a traumatic situation as that?
Well, you've got, when you're thinking of children, and I'm talking more on the level of elementary school children,
mm-hmm.
they have two very important parts in their life. One is friends, the other is family.
Mm-hmm.
When you begin to put them on a tilt with uncertainty and fear and hopelessness, with those two things, or if you challenge that base of friends and family at all, those emotions are not just going to come, they're going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, as a children's book author, we have to address those things that concern them, which are friends and family, and what we can do to help keep them. So what can we do to help keep them safe? And so address those things that are important to them.
So Andrea, so what do you have a personal story that that where a disaster hit you or hit your community really hard, and the lasting effects from that event? Uh-oh.
Unmute. I feel like there is like snowpocalypse on the East Coast sort of thing that I had never heard of before, with the superstorms out there that make me worry for my family. I am here in California. Yes, we felt the earthquake. Couldn't miss it. And there's fires out here that are just, even if it's not a fire in the city, the smoke from the outlying areas that are burning, lead to breathing issues, can aggravate asthma, and in some cases, in some terrible cases, when they're burning through communities, that is a sort of thing that can help contribute to the homelessness situation that we have here. Many homes are burned and there's no place for people to go. So, so that is something that I find concerning. And another thing, and this is from the past, the space shuttle came down to Inglewood, probably about 10 years ago. They had the space shuttle going down Crenshaw Boulevard.
Wow.
To get it to the museum at the end, the California Science Museum. And it was really a wonderful thing to see, to be in the neighborhood and see, everybody just out there watching this big event. But in order for them to get the space shuttle, which is very huge, to go down the street, they had to cut down the trees. And a lot of people were very upset about that part, because I have noticed from a young age in certain neighborhoods, there's lots of trees. It's a little bit cooler. There's a little bit of respite when you go under the tree and you're out in the sun in the summer. And then in the cities, there's all this asphalt, and there aren't always as many trees. And that can, again, when we already have climate issues where things are getting hotter and hotter, that just seems to make things even worse.
Yeah. So how do we, how can storytellers present and educate? It's very complex. All of the complexities, all of the intersectionalities of environmental injustice or climate change itself. How do we storytellers educate on these complexities, and in a way that centers the young child, but also that brings hope? Crystal, can you actually, Alan, you know what, Andrea, I want you to answer that. How do we educate on the complex climate change, centering that those kids, especially in those most vulnerable communities? and delivering hope.
Yeah, I think that the first thing, from my point of view, the first thing is always understanding who the audience is. So it's not just talking to young audiences about climate change. It's like just imagining like one specific kid. And for some of my books, I wrote a book about LA architect Paul R. Williams, who, and that story involved things like redlining, sundown towns, housing inequity, and all of that. And when I went to a school in Inglewood and I presented the book and I asked the kids, so what kind of house would you like to live in when you grow up? There was this little boy who just kind of looked at me like he had just disconnected from me. He goes, does it always have to be a house? Why can't it be an apartment? And I was just like, you are so right. I'm going to go on my computer right now and change that question.
You know,
thinking about, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I want to interrupt you because you know what this reminded me of? It reminded me of a story that Crystal shared with me a few weeks ago about kids wanting, this child is telling you, well, what about does it have to be a house? Why not an apartment? Crystal shared a story where a child stood up and said, I want stories I want to read, stories that's authentic to me. Crystal, can you share that story? I think another writer had shared that with you.
I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. If you're talking about Sarah Aronson.
Yes.
So Sarah Aronson was visiting Texas and we had lunch together. And she told me about an author visit that she had gone to, and it was an all-boys school. And she said, Crystal, it went great. It was a great author visit. And I got into the Q&A part, and the boys were asking all kinds of wonderful questions. And then this one boy said, wait a minute, I wrote it down so I'll get it right here. This one boy asked Sarah, have you noticed that a lot of the new middle grade books seem to be written for grown-ups? They read like medicine. These are the novels that are being handed to me to read, and I'm not enjoying them.
Wow.
So what I heard, Pam, from this boy is that he wants to read books where protagonists are imperfect, where the story is not didactic, or the ending isn't always a nice, neat little bow. I heard that he wants an opportunity to learn about the narrative and form his own opinion. Right. And you know what? He is right.
I love that.
We cannot solve problems at the same level of thinking we were at when those problems were created.
Right.
A higher level of thinking, a higher level of creating story where relatable with relatable protagonists, with help from scientists, and authors and illustrators. Children can form their own ideas and either sit at the table with us or daggone it, start their own table.
Yeah. So Andrea was talking about the little boy who said, doesn't have to be houses. Can it be apartments? An apartment complex. And I'm thinking, Andrea, of the different kinds of stories and the different kinds of communities that exist, because we tend to think of when we start talking about, especially Black communities, we tend to think of it, everybody as a monolith, and not thinking about the diversity that truly exists from household to household, even within that household. So when we think about how diverse families are, it makes me wonder about how diverse should our storytelling be. So Andrea, let's talk about story structure and different kinds of story structures, different kinds of narratives that we can bring to this topic. And how do we ensure that the information we share is accurate, is up to date, and just relatable to kids? Did I say too much? That was a
Oh no, I
mouthful.
was kind of like, okay, maybe. Um, I have a few thoughts. I have a few thoughts on this. The first thought I have is I used to volunteer with an organization on Saturdays in downtown LA where we would read books to kids, and then we would read the book aloud to a bunch of kids, and then we would do arts and crafts with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called Reading to Kids. And the process of reading like hundreds and hundreds of books to kids who were not my students, we're just all here to hear stories, and noticing what made them want to lean forward, and noticing what made them want to lean back, and what they wanted to draw when we got to the craft part. Just all of that was the best education I have ever had in learning how to write for real kids, because they were right in front of me, giving me feedback on somebody else's work. So wow. I would definitely suggest that. I have another suggestion, and I was going to say this might be a suggestion for somebody who is like a person of color, or somebody from a more marginalized population. Something that I have found a lot of, especially as a teacher, as a writing teacher and as a mentor, is that a lot of us have a certain amount of colonization in our storytelling inherently, because that's what we learned in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that sort of thing. And there is a fair amount of unlearning, I think, that some of us need to do. Like, for example, I didn't tell a lot of stories about certain parts of my life when I was younger, because I thought, oh, we're not supposed to talk about that. We're supposed to talk about this. I came from a family that had issues with airing dirty laundry. And if anybody in my family is in the chat right now, it's okay. I'll be good. But the point is, I think that it's so ingrained in us that there's a certain sort of thing that is literature, that stories are told in a certain way, that there is a specific 3-act structure that's based on, going back to the Greeks and all this. But the point is, there are so many different ways to tell stories. There are so many little details that seem like an everyday thing to us that we wouldn't think about, that could be something new to somebody else.
Right. Superheroes and graphic novels.
Yeah, it takes a lot of bravery, I think, in order to do this. But what happens is, when a kid reads something like that, they see themselves. They see themselves. Lives. They see, who they really are. And all of a sudden, it kind of elevates how they feel about themselves. Because if you can talk about this in public and make stories about it and tell my real life,
yeah,
I do. What can I do?
I love that.
And that's how I feel like we are purveying hope.
Yeah.
In the sense that we create these stories, we create these worlds, we invite the kids to participate in them. We ask them what kind of worlds that they would create. And there's a saying, you have to see it to be it. And it's true for kids, it's true for adults, it's really true for all of us. So, and again, that's why I like writing my utopia story.
I love it. Yeah. And I love, like I said earlier, the way that you center this little Black girl in this story. It's wonderful to see. And it's not like, oh, it's about a Black girl. It's about a girl who was born Black, having these experiences. So Crystal, so Andrea talked about making sure that we engage and log in with the kids to see what it is that they like. But we want to make sure that we get the accurate, we want to make sure that the information we present to them is information that these kids can read about and be educated. There's a term called edutain, right? In the education industry. But so how, Crystal, can we collaborate with folks like those at Knology, Black for Representation? How do we collaborate with them as writers?
First, let me unmute. Okay.
That will help.
I think as a children's book author, I always have a child at heart. And for scientists, they have what is going to be the best for our planet at heart. And I'm just talking about what we're talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So if we consider that there are things that we are paid for, and then there are things we are made for.
Mm.
If we come to the table with the idea that I was made to be a children's book author, I was made to be a scientist, then we can come together with our gifts. So when we collaborate like that, it's pure, Pam. And we're able to think like children. And I think the biggest thing for both of us would be if we're able to answer that question that people will ask. And that is, how does this affect my ability to be me?
Mm.
What are you going to teach me about climate change that is affecting my ability to be me?
Mm.
And I think scientists will be able to give us those facts.
Mm-hmm.
And we as children's book authors will be able to create an engaging story to answer those questions.
Yeah.
It'll be a community that we'll create. And I think that's how we'll do it.
I love that, bringing the community, always working in community. Everybody who knows me knows that I love that word. That's one of my favorite words. And getting the knowledge, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of information, scientists knowing how to present information in a developmentally appropriate way, to have information ready, available for those read aloud audiences, those audiences that are learning to read, those audiences that are learning how to gather information in an equitable, factual, friendly way, and then disseminating that information, all of those. So I love the fact that you're saying that scientists are there. We can use them as our resources, and they can use us as their resources as we learn to center our children. And as Andrea said earlier, there is a shift in mindset that does have to happen, because we do have to see each other. We have to affirm the humanity in one another and see each other as equal. And in that way, we can demand that these refineries are removed from the communities, sewer plants are removed from the communities, but bring everybody to the table, have those stories be engaged so that kids are part of the decision-making process in the stories. They are their own superheroes, and that they are rallying with themselves and among themselves. They are creating their own communities. I would love to see, I'm thinking of a whole book series actually, for something like that. But Crystal, I do want to ask you this though, about how do we affirm the humanity in each other? What are the things that we need to highlight in order to look each other in the eye and say, I see you and I need you to see me? What are those things that we can do to affirm each other? I know that we need to just simple things like ensuring that we have safe water, right?
Yes. And well, let's use that. Let me use that. Because they're actually rights. We have a right to clean air and to clean water, right? And we have a right to have access to it, right? And we have a right to voice our opinions about it, and that those opinions be heard, and that we believe that they've been heard. And
Mhm.
all of this is our right with no prejudice.
Right.
There should be nothing about age. There should be nothing about income status. All of these things are rights that we have, Pam. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
as we create stories, what we have to remember is that as we create our protagonist and even supporting characters,
Mhm.
we have to create them as brave,
Mhm. Mhm.
not as
Mhm.
victims.
Right. Right.
We have to do that because it is not just Black children who need to see themselves in stories.
Mhm.
All children need to see Black children in these stories, need to
100%.
see them have agency, and need to see them with their opinions, and need to see them with knowledge of the
Right.
issues surrounding what's going on. Because Pam, you and I are the windows and the mirrors that they're looking into and out of, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So our jobs as creatives and scientists are to equip these children with armor
Right.
to
Yeah.
fight
What
for
beautiful.
equality. And
Yeah.
that's how we let them see themselves, is by equipping them with the
Right.
information that they need.
I love that because, Andrea, I look at our writing as a bit of social activism, right? I think all of us are comfortable with that idea of being activists, and bringing fair and equitable sharing, the truth sharing of information with young audiences. And so I want to, before we leave, Andrea, I want you to talk a little bit about when we talk about collaboration. We have the scientists collaborating with writers, and both of those collaborating with teachers. But how do we present our stories in a way that's marketable to the publishing house? What do we say to them? How do we make inroads so that these qualities of affirmation are being shared? And is there anybody that's doing that actually?
Well, I believe that there are a good amount of publishers who are definitely like right in this, right in this lane. I do want to roll back and just say that in my heart, I believe that, like, if the world is like a gigantic library, we all have a page or so to contribute, and everybody has something to contribute. And that is why they say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a community, because we need to hear from others. We need to hear from the wisdom of these people and the experience of those people, and and all of that. I think that's what really, really makes the difference, especially for the formidable challenges that grown-ups now, but kids now and kids who will become grown-ups have before them.
Yeah.
That's definitely one part of it. But the thing that has been working for me, at least, and the example I give is the Abby in Orbit chapter book series. This is the one where she goes to the moon for a for a field trip. I work with the publisher, Albert Whitman and Company, with this. And when we talked about the character and what the character would be like, I asked something that I was always afraid to ask, but I never asked before. I asked because they wanted a little Black Anna Green Gables in space kind of a thing. That's my jam. But I asked, can she be Afro-Latina? Because my dad's from Panama, and I never see that out there. So I took the risk and I asked.
Yeah.
And they said yes, and they were really thrilled about it, and they thought it was great. And then I was able to put characters from different places in the world, share their language. All that stuff ends up like in back matter. Also scientific back matter. One of the editors that I worked with on this series, she was she studied, she was an aerospace engineer and a children's book editor. So I basically got great information from scientists on how to do everything.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Because again, I don't have to know everything if I can bring in somebody else. They know the science, but they don't necessarily know how to present it to like an 18-month-old. And that is
Right.
how Charles Bridge works with some of their book series. This is the Chicken Soup for Baby series, but they also have like storytelling math and other series. And what they do is they bring in artists, they bring in writers to write stories based on scientific, mathematical, STEM concepts, sort of a thing. And in my case, I met with scientists who understood specifically how to teach an 18-month-old these mathematical concepts.
Wow.
And we went back and forth until we came up with a story that for me worked lyrically and emotionally. Because again, if there's no emotion, it's not really a story. It's just kind of a bunch of facts.
I love that Charles Bridge is doing that. I'm sorry, I keep talking over you, but I love that Charles Bridge is doing something like that. And I know that there are other houses that are participating and encouraging writers to write on those levels. I love.
But that collaboration is really wonderful, because then it means that everybody can focus on the thing that they're best at.
Mm-hmm.
And then when everything comes together, you're getting everybody's best. You're not getting me being like, should I go get a PhD so I can write this board book? Someone else has, they're explaining to me what needs to be in there, and I'm making it work in a way that is dramatic and that a kid would want to read over and over again.
Yeah.
So basically, I feel like, and again, this is me being about hope, but I feel like any problem that is created by humans can also be solved by humans. I say this as a computer science teacher who's always teaching people how to stop being hacked because the hackers are always upping their game. It goes back and forth. So that means that anything that that these kids are coming up against, we might not be able to give them the specific answers on how to do X, Y, and Z, but we can show them how to tap into their creativity.
Yeah.
We can encourage them to be curious. We can show them what it means to do something when you're afraid, but you do it anyway. And that's what the bravery is. All of these things. We've all had the same emotions. Human beings have had the same emotion for however many tens, hundreds, thousands of years. As long as there's been people, there's been emotional stories. And none of that really changes. And I find that by tapping into that emotion, that universal experience that we all have, you can tell all different kinds of stories and open up worlds that people have never seen, or open up worlds that people have seen, but they never saw reflected.
Just be as creative. Just be as creative as the world will allow you to. Not a world will allow you to be, but just be as creative as you can. I love it.
Just telling the truth. Like, this is what it's really like. This is how it's really been.
Yeah.
And just go from there. It's amazing to see what happens when people see themselves lovingly portrayed. It's life-changing.
Wow.
World-changing.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Ms. Andrea. This is such a robust conversation. I think we could probably talk forever.
We really could.
We really could, because it's so large, it's so huge of a topic, and it affects everyone. And focusing on one, it's a lot, but I'm so glad that we did this. I think you ladies were amazing. Allison, do we have any? I'm sure we have questions.
Oh, you've given so much. You've given us so much to think about. Then when we're thinking, we're asking questions too. So one thing that I'm going to do is some crowdsourcing, because, we have close to 100 people on the call tonight. And one of the main question was about great book titles. And of course, Andrea was holding up some book titles. We mentioned book titles throughout. If everybody put one book title in the chat, we'd walk away with 100 great books that are talking about, whether it's a book to share with kids about the environment and climate change, or it's a book for research. And I'll put in the chat too, Knology has an excellent library, a resource library on their website that showcases a number of wonderful books. So we'll crowdsource the book question, and then we'll put this chat in the email that we send out with the recording and with the post, and we'll turn the three of you to. I've kind of gathered some of the questions together to kind of loop some themes. One of the themes, Pam, I heard you say it, and I know it's your teacher voice coming out too. You use the phrase developmentally appropriate ways, and there are several questions that hit on things that are pedagogy and age appropriateness and reading level. And so I wondered if the three of you might have some thoughts about what's the difference? What does the story look like, or how is it approached for a very young reader or someone who's on the lap of a reader who's reading to them versus, middle grade, young adult? So when we're talking about climate change and the environment, when we're talking about these racial inequities, what does that look like in the stories that we're putting out?
I think that the first thing is understanding the audience. There's certain things that a 6-year-old might understand that an 18-month might not understand, but an 18-month-old child understands the difference between hot and cold, for example. So really just kind of like starting where they are and using adding in elements of the story from the world that they already inhabit, because everything's new to a kid. So being able to just kind of like build on that. The older they get, I feel like you can add more, a bit more complexity, a bit more curiosity. It constantly amazes me how I present so many things to kids. Information on economic inequity and all kinds of things, and kids they want to know, and they don't necessarily feel bad about history because they weren't necessarily there, but they want to know what happens. And I always feel like if you make it age appropriate and you speak from the heart to somebody else's heart, it really does come through. And maybe there's a political aspect of things, or what they call challenging subjects, but to me, that's mostly like politics that kids don't have so much because they're still at that things need to be fair level of things in life. So yeah, I just try to be upfront and try to find the metaphors and the examples of things that they can do to physically embody the information that's being presented to them that makes them want to draw it or write or play it out or reenact it or something like that.
Right.
And you know what else, Andrea? It's just how the picture and the words work as a marriage. I mean, just work together. Those, when you're holding that baby or you're holding that toddler, that young, or a teacher is sitting in circle time, she's holding up a book and she asks these open-ended questions about, well, let's talk about what you see in these pictures. Well, in your mind, why do you think the illustrator chose to share this information this way, or listen to this language, these words? Why do you think the author chose to use these words for you, and talk directly to them? Because we want them to know that these books, because we do pour our hearts out in these books just for them. So I think like how the language and how the illustrations work together is such a wonderful way for that young read aloud audience. And I know Crystal could probably.
Well, I had a conversation, Pam. I don't know if you have the ability to put the conversation, the chat that I had with Christine Taylor Butler.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
But I did. I had this amazing conversation with Christine Taylor Butler. She is a graduate of MIT. She's a scientist and an engineer and a children's book author. So we spoke a lot about science in children's literature and how she creates her books involving STEM-related topics. Christine, she told me that scientists are always thinking about that question, what problem are we trying to solve? And children's book authors are always thinking about what problem is my character's journey going to involve? And so as that in itself has a connection. And it's basically going to be on what level are we trying to create this story. So I invite everyone to listen to that chat that I had with Christine Taylor Butler. I think it'll be enlightening for you. It definitely was for me.
Thank you. Yes, great. And I love all the resources that are coming through right now. So many books in there as well. We probably have time. Again, I'm going to summarize one more question before we wrap things up tonight. It ties back to the video that you played at the beginning. I hope we all go back and listen to that video again and hear those voices and the honesty that comes from it. What do you know about climate change? Nothing. When did you hear about it? When you were talking to me about it, and more. And yet, if we had endless amounts of time to talk with the kids, they all have their connections to it. But some people asked about maybe some previews that we didn't hear. Did kids bring up anything else? Did they bring up where climate or the environment is being spoken about in their community? Did they talk about the role of corporations? Are they aware of things? They talked about trees and they talked about the weather. Did they talk about things kind of in their community or larger than that, like corporations or governments or anything?
We had a few that I had, and some of those I didn't send to Andrea, but yeah, where they talked about how people in their own community, even people like, for example, the mayor or their city councilman, they knew about that, and I thought that was interesting, and it reminded me of my story about how they put a sewer plant in one of the communities here. And it was horrible for decades. But those kids that lived in that community, they then came back and they became part of city council, became mayors of the city, and are making changes to fix that up. So when I heard that child say that, I probably should have kept it in. But yeah, some of them did talk about their local what do you call those people? Their local representatives participating in this story, which I thought was really great and very interesting.
Yeah, they talked about the polar ice caps, and it was, what was it, like 35 minutes worth of recordings that I was trying.
I'm sorry.
No, it was wonderful because I wanted to put everything in there. We couldn't even fit. There were children there who actually talked about this from their point of view of their religions and how that informed what was going on from their point of view. And and then there were some kids who were just like, I don't really know, and this is a thing that's up there, it's not a little thing down here for me. So, but they were so cute, and that last one just, oh my gosh, stole my heart.
It's great. You gave them a chance to talk and be curious. And I love that books do that too. They give kids a chance to open up and talk with us about what they're thinking and what they're seeing and feeling in the earth. I thank the three of you so much. I thank you for bringing so many ideas to us tonight. I do want to wrap up by sharing a few resources for continued learning. This is one of our free gathers, but it's not the end of opportunities and things that we have here. There will be a number of links, again, that I'm sharing that other people have shared. And I just want to reiterate, we'll get all of this information out to everyone. First, from Knology's Black Rep for Kids, there is a survey that they are looking for people to participate in that is specifically to authoring STEM stories for climate risk preparedness. And I'm going to place that survey. You can read more about the survey itself. You can also read more about Knology and upcoming events by visiting the websites there. Another thing that I feel compelled to mention is some programs we have with our talented panelists. They are involved both far and wide in teaching kids and adults about topics like this. Andrea will be one of our special guests at Successful School Visits. And Andrea has been a part of that faculty for a very long time. She, as she did tonight, does an amazing job of talking about how you center kids in the presentation aspect of bringing stories to kids. School visits are an excellent way to get kids talking and to bring your stories to them. And so I'm excited. Andrea will be a part of an amazing faculty. It's an amazing program. You actually get to do a virtual visit that we record, and then we talk to you about that recording. And this year we're doing it back in classrooms. So you're assigned a classroom that you get to be with kiddos. And Andrea's been with us when we did that in person before. And when we kind of sent you out on your own to do that. So we're excited. I'll drop that link in the chat as well. And then Pam and Crystal, we're bringing them back together again. They'll be with us, and they'll be joined by editor Eileen Robinson at an upcoming, it's one of our short courses that we call a mini. It really ties directly into tonight's conversation. They're talking about social and emotional themes in picture books and novels, and their examples are pulling directly from climate change and social justice. It's a 2-night course. It's a 2.5-hour commitment, but it is filled with writing exercises, book recommendations. I bet we'll pull some book recommendations from our chat tonight. They'll be talking about the market itself. There were questions about agents and editors and other publishing houses. That will be a part of it. We're excited to have them back with us. And some of the resources that are on the page for this course might also be of interest, and those resources are free at the link as well. So I'll wrap things up quickly by saying thank you so much to everyone who came to join in tonight's conversation. We hope that you'll consider joining us again. I do want to say a big thank you to everyone at the Highlights Foundation who's on the screen or at home or working behind the scenes. The Highlights Foundation team does incredible work to make events like tonight possible, and so much more happen. Much gratitude, of course, to Pam and Crystal and Andrea for their time tonight and for the way that they center children in story time and time again. To all of you, stay safe and good night. Thanks, everyone.